The time is almost upon us. Path of Exile 2 launches into early access on December 6th for both PC and console, and a game that has taken over half of a decade of development will make huge waves in the ARPG hack and slash world. Just the other day, the team at Grinding Gear Games did a huge hour-plus stream documenting the majority of content coming to not just early access, but the game as a whole. In this video today, I want to break down everything on a high level to give you an understanding of what's coming. And let me tell you, it's shaping up to be an absolute nuke, in the words of Darth microtransactions. But in the typical fashion of upfronting knowledge in my videos, let me just give you a quick breakdown of everything. Early access starts on December 6th for both PC and console. In order to get access, you'll need to purchase a $30 supporter pack. Or if you've already done something like $480 in Path of Exile 1, you'll be given access. When the game does go live, it will be free to play, so you can wait until then if you want. It's worth noting that each one of these supporter packs is fully converted to the game's microtransaction currency, which is exclusively used for inventory and stash tabs, as well as cosmetics. So the base pack gives you access and $30 of MTX currency, which is huge, right? It's usually just, oh, here's $5 of MTX currency for $25 of access or whatever. Early access will launch with 6 classes: Mercenary, Ranger, Warrior, Monk, Sorceress, and Witch, with 6 more coming throughout early access or at least at full launch: Templar, Druid, Huntress, Marauder, Duelist, and Shadow. Each class has 3 total Ascendancy classes. Think of them sort of like Destiny subclasses that you branch out to at max level. And in early access, you can access 2 of the 3. The game will launch with 6 total acts, but in early access we'll have 3 acts to take advantage of and a slew of endgame content. With 50 bosses and 400 monster types during early access, the team will be doubling that throughout the EA period. So there's just tons coming. Additionally, once you beat the campaign, there are 6 or 7 some odd endgame events, each with their own skill trees. Lastly, they've streamlined the entire massive passive skill system so that it's far more accessible to new players. People always say that you need a PhD to play Path of Exile 1. You do not need that. Well, maybe you need like an associate's degree for Path of Exile 2. But also, every class can use every skill in the game as long as they have the proper attributes needed. So for example, you can use a monk skill if you have the quarterstaff weapon skill unlocked, as well as the required dexterity and intelligence, and more on that in this respective section. But that's the entire down and dirty of everything discussed. They mentioned that early access might take around 6 months, but that was vaguely alluded to, and they'll have a better idea once access starts and they get better player feedback. If that's all you want to know, or you're already up to date, please feel free to shut the video down. I want to be respectful of your time. You can also navigate to any part of this video that interests you the most using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. But before you head out, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe if this video ended up helping you, as that does help me in a huge way. Lastly, I'll be streaming this game on my Twitch, where I do tons of giveaways and other fun stuff, so drop a follow using the link in the description of the pinned comment. But let's get started here on my recap of the Path of Exile 2 early access announcement stream. Before we get started too, I just want to say, I think that Diablo 4 is going to be just fine. I know that the title of this, is super incendiary. It's just the toxic nature of YouTube and having to have some sort of clickbaity, very incendiary style of title. I think that, again, Diablo 4 can exist, Last Epoch can exist, and Path of Exile can all exist within the same genre and still all be great and successful games. Just like I think that Helldivers 2 and Space Marine 2 can exist in the same genre and still be great fun games. Just a quick little upfront, and also on top of that, I will be talking about a bunch of different things in this, and to give you written explanations to it, I'll be pointing you towards mobalytics.gg. They have a lot of really cool write-ups for a lot of this stuff already, so if you want to dive in on more information, you can go ahead and take a look at the links that I'll be providing in the description. Any of the build videos that I'm going to be planning for Path of Exile 2 will be on Mobalytics, like I did with Diablo 4. And whenever you go to any of those links, it does help me out, as I'm going to be part of an affiliate program with them. So just a little bit of upfront information before we dive into the actual stuff for Path of Exile. So to get us started, let's talk about the classes that are coming to early access, as well as the 6 additional classes. Like I said in the beginning, the 6 early access classes are Monk, warrior, ranger, mercenary, witch, and sorceress. We'll be getting 6 more classes added throughout the early access period or right at launch. The first 2 that they want to add in are the huntress and the druid. So we'll hopefully get those added in pretty quickly for those that want to play like a druid style character, or basically like an Amazon character from D2 or Diablo 2 for that matter. So again, just to recap real quick: monk, warrior, ranger, mercenary, witch, and sorceress. And what I'm going to do now is quickly go over each on a high level of what we saw from that early access and all of the existing knowledge that we've got from Path of Exile 2. But I will be doing a full in-depth "is this right for you, which class to choose" style video on the 6th. So when you jump in, you can decide which one of these classes is going to be the first one that you're going to want to start off with. Let's now talk about the monk and how that works. The monk is more of a, fast and furious type of melee character. You're going to be using a quarterstaff. You're going to build up momentum. You're going to dash in and out of combat. But really, this isn't like the monk from, say, Diablo 3 or the spirit form from Diablo 4, which really utilizes far more, I would argue, light style of damage, and maybe the spirit form is kind of more off base there because it's more elemental, but this monk is more elemental. You're going to have 3 schools of martial arts: lightning, ice, and wind, and you can combo all of these together and mix them with the 21 some odd active skills of the quarterstaff. So it's designed to be a class that you can combine things together and use things in really staggering ways. Like you have Killing Palm, which allows you to dash to low life enemies and kill them instantly, gain power charges, consume those power charges with other skills for devastating attacks. So a little bit of a combo system built into this. You can use Tempest Bell to give you some AoE damage. I almost said restoration. Some AoE damage, can freeze and shock stuff. There's a lot of different elements that you can then chain these things together. Like the monk themselves can empower their staff. They can use abilities to build those combo points like I was talking about. And oftentimes too, with their skills, they can wind them up and change direction in the middle of what they're doing. So you're charging up your ability and then you retarget it wherever you want to give you that kind of very fast and furious type of gameplay that allows you to mix elements around to kind of create this cool concoction. And that is something that we'll talk about a little bit more with the sorceress, but you have these abilities to essentially empower your own skills with the skills that you've got using different elemental types and what have you. And we're going to talk more about skills and skill gems and how they work in its own section. But the skill gems portion is a very huge thing in this game. So if you like anything from the monk class, you can play it on the warrior. You can play it on the ranger, the mercenary, the witch, whatever it is. So keep that in mind as I'm talking about each one of these. Let's now move on to the warrior. Our next class is Old Faithful, the warrior. And warrior this time around, or at least right here, is going to be slower. It's a much harder hitting class. They use maces, they do ground pounds, a lot of charging mechanics. And one thing I want to bring up here that is kind of alluded to in the monk is that Path of Exile 2 is very big on, I don't want to say animation canceling because that's not it, but it's retargeting in the midst of an animation. Like, hey, you know what? You've got an animation where you're running up to something and then you're going to jump in the air and slam it with your mace. Well, you can retarget that as you're running towards whatever you're going to do the mace when, if it's in the general, trajectory. So this gives you the ability to say, hey, you know what? I was running over here to do something. Uh-oh. That thing died. Well, I'm not going to waste the attack in that direction. I can divert it to another location. And the monk is really all about that built into it, but the warrior has it too because they have a lot of winding up with a lot of their bigger attacks. Mace is going to be a much slower, heavier hitting melee style of character, and the warrior as a whole is going to feel like that. You got your big earthquake ability to slam the ground, creating fissures everywhere. You're going to see, some other Old Faithfuls like war cries are accessible to this character. But there's another cool mechanic with the warrior is shields and shield blocking. So the way shields work in Path of Exile 2 is that you raise your shield up and it blocks all damage from the front, including spells, which is really cool. But while you're blocking, you have a stun meter that's going to build up. If it reaches 100%, it's basically a stance break. You'll go ahead and be stunned. And it's a cool way to give you a little bit of like when I say ARPG, I mean more of like your Soulsborne style of character with, hey, I've got a big heavy shield, I can take a lot of beating with it. But there are also unblockable attacks. So even if you do have your shield up, you'll see a red flash and you'll have to dodge out of that. attack, which is a real cool mechanic that I think adds for a little bit more engagement than the typical warrior archetype of an ARPG, and a hack and slash, at least our ARPG. Also, lastly, with the warrior, we have access to totems, like a shockwave totem, which will stun nearby enemies and trigger aftershocks, and ancestral warrior totems. And you can go into this more over with Ascendant Classes, which we'll talk about in a bit, but really lean into that warrior totem direction. Next is Ranger, and Ranger is one that they've already kind of divulged quite a bit to us, but Ranger is definitely more of an agile bow user style of character. You're shooting while moving, you're jumping around, you're shooting. It's definitely not that style of shooting where you're kind of just staying still and shooting a whole bunch of crap like you've done in a lot of other action ARPGs. Action RPGs, that's redundant. And a lot of other hack and slash Diablo clones, right? Even Path of Exile 1 or Diablo 1, 2, 3, 4, anytime you're using a bow and arrow, it's usually very stationary, holding down shift to do it. This is kind of combining the way that the Dragon's Dogma 2 Archer operates with a lot of jumping attacks and shooting, but putting it into a hack and slash style. And I really like what I see. This is the class that I'll be playing. You're going to be able to tap into lightning skills that are going to bounce between targets, poisons like poison grenades and so on and so forth. You can grow plants, which is funky, ice and slowing and freezing things, and also tons of physical capabilities. And you can mix skills for combos as well to have a lot of fun with the Ranger. I think Ranger is going to be a lot of crazy hecticness, and they showed off in the ability to morph some of these skill gems. You can get abilities that allow I think this actually might have been a passive, if I remember correctly. I can't recall, but you can get something that allows your Ranger bow skills to ricochet, and then you can imbue them with like fire damage, and it basically looks like you're using Dragon's Breath shotgun all over the place. It's just awesome. So the Ranger has a lot of really fun, cool capabilities, a lot of mobile gameplay that I think is going to be very rewarding for people that want to speed up their gameplay, but also stay at range and do a lot of crazy elemental DPS. Now, on the scope of range DPS, we have also the Mercenary. So the Mercenary is going to be using a crossbow, whereas the Ranger uses a bow. And the Mercenary, though, is going to play, kind of like a shooter, using WASD to kind of move around, and you have skills that are going to be tied to shotguns, sniper rifles, assault rifles, grenade launchers, those style of abilities that you've seen from other shooter games kind of combined into this class. Elemental ammo types with a quick switching capability, and it seems that this class is it's focused on doing a lot of combo abilities for devastating effect. Like you use Glacial Bolt to create a wall of ice. Then you use a fragmentation round to explode the ice walls for massive AoE damage. You have armor piercing rounds, you have high velocity rounds, a gas grenade that can also be detonated as well, an artillery ballista. So Mercenary is one of those ones that seems to be very crazy, right? With a lot of different moving parts, and that you're really going to be comboing off of in a lot of crazy ways to get a lot of crazy effective damage out of it. Now, one mechanic I want to talk about too that is linked to everyone is flasks and charms. So flasks are going to be used to heal you. You can heal you multiple times, and you charge these by simply by simply killing things. So you've got your flask that's going to heal your mana and one that's going to heal your health. But now you also get charms. And charms are a new item type that are basically going to auto defend you against debuffs and certain damage types. So you'll recharge those by killing enemies as well, but you'll gain more charm slots by upgrading your belt. And I think this is a really cool way to give you a little bit of insulation as you jump into different higher difficulties, harder things, whatever it is, where you're maybe not prepared for stuff. And it makes it so that you're not just constantly fighting against debuffs and damage types, which becomes a big part of the extended meta game of the end game of all hack and slash RPGs. So I think this is a really cool way to add a little bit more variety to stuff and give you a little bit more survivability in those certain situations. For those that like your pet classes, the Witch is going to be for you. It's your Necromancer by and large. So they've done a really cool approach for the minion summoner class of the Witch. They use spirit as a resource to create permanent minions. And what I mean by permanent is that the minions will automatically revive if they die, which is a quality of life that I love for a minion class, right? We've all played our Diablo 2 Bone Necromancer. We've played our Diablo Necromancer character. We've played our Path of Exile Necromancer characters. All of these characters that exist in all of these ARPGs resummoning them is kind of a tedious portion of that, especially if you die and you're trying to do a boss fight. The game will just auto-resurrect them, and you choose from a menu saying, hey, you know what? I want 5 skeletal warriors, or I want 3 skeletal arsonists. And the game will automatically resurrect them as long as you have the necessary spirit and spirit gems to then cast your relative skills and cast all of your, what are the things called? All of your minions, which is just really, 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 I think it's a really cool, unique way to approach this that makes it more hands-off. So you can focus on doing all the other things that you want to do as a minion class rather than focusing on solely, okay, I only have 4 of my warriors up. Let me summon a 5th one. Oh, I only got 4. Let me summon a 5th one. It's just constantly updating. So you have stuff like a skeletal warrior, which is your cheap, weak minion. But again, I mentioned the skeletal arsonist. They're your heavy hitters. You have all this stuff. You have command skills to detonate minions for more AoE damage. You can use chaos spells to spread disease, bone skills to impale enemies, curses to weaken enemies. So you'll have a lot of occult skills is what they're called, to allow you to combine different minions together or different command skills to cause a lot of really cool effects with all of these minions. And our last class is the Sorceress. The Sorceress is your typical elemental spellcaster, right? You're going to use fire, you're going to use ice, you're going to use lightning, but it's more than that. And I didn't talk about this in the Mercenary section, so I saved it here for Sorceress. Weapon swapping is going to be a very huge part of this game, and I'm going to talk about that even more in the skill section, which is next. But weapon swapping is going to allow you to swap back and forth between weapons that have corresponding bonuses for different elements or different skill types or whatever it is. So maybe I'm trying to use, hey, I'm going to create a wall of fire with my fire staff that's giving me fire bonus. Then I'm going to swap my weapon set over to my lightning thing, and I'm going to cast the you'll see it right here, like all these little sparks on the ground and everything. This allows you to weave these elemental magics together. So now all that lightning damage goes through the firewall, and it imbues that lightning damage with fire damage. So swapping between your weapons is going to be a very huge part of this game. Maybe you're playing a warrior and you're thundering down with the mace. You swap over to your shield for some defensive capabilities. You're a mercenary. You're using a crossbow to swap on over to a different crossbow that does different armor-piercing rounds or whatever it is. Swapping is going to be crucial because it also plays into how the skills work. So Sorceress this time around is not just simply, oh, I've used a fireball. I've used an ice explosion. I've used a lightning storm. I've combined these elemental things together to weave stuff around. And I think that is what is going to make the Sorceress so cool, is to have a lot of fun with all this and use stuff like trigger gems. Trigger gems are what allows you to have fun with combining these elements together. So it automatically, my note here is uses trigger gems to cast on Ignite with Firestorm to automatically cast spells. So basically this weaving of these elemental spells together, I think is going to be a very fun and original approach for those of you that like playing elemental spellcasters. But let me talk about bringing all this together with class flexibility as well as our passive and active skills in our next section. So this wouldn't be Path of Exile if it did not have an elaborate passive skill system, but also there is an active skill system I want to go through first before we get into the big web here. So the active skill system is pretty interesting. Every single skill in the game can be used by every single class. So for example, if I've got the Killing Palm skill from the monk, I can use it on a warrior as long as I've unlocked the quarterstaff combat skill of using quarterstaves, and I have the prerequisite of the stats that require. It could be dexterity and intelligence, whatever it is. Or I can use a bow on the sorceress. I can use a hammer, or a mace on the witch. Whatever it is, whatever I want, I can mix and match. That is a real awesome system here. And on top of it, you have skill gems. So basically skill gems are going to be the big driving force of the game. The gem system, as it were, unlocks gem cutting. So you can use these skill gems to give you access to, again, one of the weapon styles, like let's just say mace or a bow or a crossbow, but it also opens up elemental skills like fire, ice, lightning, such like that. And once you get those skill gems, you have a skill socketing system. So you'll have 9 skill sockets you can put these skill gems into. And then you have support gems. So essentially, you take these support gems and you socket them into your existing skill gems to drastically change the way that this works. And every single skill can have up to 5 supports per skill. So this gives you a ton of variety, and it drastically changes these skills to encourage a lot of experimentation and build customization to say, hey, you know what? I'm using my bow and arrow on a ranger, and then I've also got a sword, let me just say. I'm going to swap back and forth my weapon sets, and I'm going to go crazy because this is going to help. The bow is going to help with my lightning damage, and maybe the sword is going to help with my physical damage, but I'm going to take advantage from both. Whatever the situation is, you get to really have a lot of fun with it. And the gem cutting allows you to expand these and give you gradual upgrade paths that are not locked to specific skills, because these skill I said cum cutting. Gem cutting allows you to level up existing skills in a way that makes sense for you, rather than saying, hey, I've gotten this skill gem that is this skill that I do not want to use for my build. It is a generic gem that you then can upgrade as you see fit. So it says, hey, this is going to give you a level 7 skill gem of whatever skill of your choosing, or maybe you go into crossbow with it, whatever it is. So this kind of open-endedness of the skill system allows you to approach things in a lot of really cool ways. And I feel like this also prevents you from getting a lot of wasted drops. So you're not just sitting there getting frustrated going, I just keep getting killing palm and I don't want killing palm at all on my build. So this again alleviates that. But with the active, we have the passive now. And this is probably going to be the biggest point of contention for a lot of people that are newcomers, or maybe people that have used this game or played this game in the past, and they've used the passive skill tree and they've gotten lost. It is the thing that has really lost pretty much every single person that's jumped in. It's the thing they've said, hey, you need a PhD to play it. There is over 1,500 nodes. That is kind of a stretch. It's hard. You gain 1 point per level. But what happens here now, and how this is different from Path of Exile 1, is that it's a lot easier to approach. So every single class starts at a different point on this passive skill tree, but they all share the same tree. So for example, the warrior starts in a different location than the sorceress. And there are clusters that are themed around specific bonuses that then give you certain things. Also, there's notables and keystones, which will then add completely different effects to the class, capabilities, skills, so on and so forth. So this gives you the ability to really flex around a specific character. But now, you know what? Hey, I've gone a lot into the warrior stuff. I want to dabble with some sorceress stuff. Well, you follow an attribute highway, which allows you to easily go from one point of the skill tree or skill web, whatever you want to call it, to another one with a lot of ease. And then respeccing is just a simple cost of some skill. I'm sorry, some gold. So this gives you a huge, extensive customization while also being approachable and not making you feel like you're so lost. You can look at it as, rather than 1,500 nodes, you can think of it as 6 different skill trees, since the 6 active classes that we've got, that are tied together by a highway of attribute points. That attribute point highway is like you get this and you choose the attributes that you want to go from one point of the skill tree to the other one. It's a lot easier of a system that doesn't mean you have to weave your way through a maze of nodes to find a certain situation that only the sorceress would have gone with otherwise. Something that's a little bit more convoluted. It's a lot cleaner. Now, in addition to this leans us back into the active skills. This leans us back into the classes. Weapon sets. You can toggle your different weapon sets. You can switch on a fly, just as you can in a majority of hack and slash RPG, ARPGs. But the weapon set will have its own passive skill tree. So this allows you to swap weapon sets. So let's say, for example, you're playing the sorceress and you're gone down the passive skill tree to focus heavily on fire, and that's one of your weapon sets. Well, you can bounce over to your other weapon set that now does a lot of lightning damage. So you've cast your fire spells, you pop over to your lightning, you cast whatever you want to do from there, you weave the two spells together, the magic together, to do whatever you wanted to get the effects you wanted. So this creates tons of granularity into all of your builds. Now, this can seem really overwhelming at first too, right? So we don't necessarily know if the weapon set passives are immediately copied and then you just customize them, or if it's every time you switch weapon sets, it's a whole new passive tree you have to build out. So for example, what I mean here is, let's say I have a sword in one hand and I have a hammer in the other, or a mace in the other. If I switch weapon sets, is my passive copied to that other weapon set Or do I have to rebuild it out entirely or change it entirely, whatever it is? So we don't know how this is fully executed, but we do know that passive trees will feel different from different weapon sets, giving us a lot of different weapon specializations, which is a huge boon to the character. Speaking of all that, we also have the progression for your character. So before we get into endgame, it's important to talk about how this all works. We've talked about our active and our passive skills. We have our weapon specializations where we can focus on specific weapons, but you also can gain permanent bonuses from optional content. So giving yourself additional spirit, which is something I loosely talked about with the witch, but the spirit resource is going to give you the ability to use certain spells or abilities and what have you. And they're for powerful skills here. And you only get 1 spirit bonus per act. And there's going to be a max of 6 acts on launch. So this gives you a lot of really cool abilities under a certain resource that is activated by simply playing the game, which is fun. There's tons of stuff with item rarities and crafting, and there's sockets and runes and currencies. I don't want to go into all that because I feel like if you're just trying to understand what the game's going to be like in early access, it's just too convoluted. It's more for people that are veterans of Path of Exile 1 and want to know more about that granularity. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be covering it here. I just want to be upfront with you. But with the character progression system, you're going to see a total of 6 acts once the game launches. For the actual early access, they've decided they're only going to do acts 1 through 3, and then they're going to duplicate acts 1 through 3 in a harder difficulty called Cruel. Basically, the campaign, the 6 acts, are going to take you from level 1 to 65. In the early access, it's going to take you from 1 to 45, and then 45 to 65, doing acts 1 to 3 over the second time. Then the end game begins at 65 plus. They've said the journey to go from basically, what's it called? The first 3 acts is going to take about 25 hours for a new player. Obviously, you'll understand it the second time around. So even when you go through from the 1 to 3, which will be level 45, to go from 45 to 65, you'll go through it much faster, right? You're not worried about the campaign anymore. You understand the campaign. You're going to click through it. You know how to hit the additional objectives. It'll be probably a much faster situation. Cruel, that difficulty that's going to be unlocked for 1 to 3 will disappear, and the game will go from from act 1 to act 6, from level 1 to 65. And they've said that the reason they did this for early access is so that they can focus more on the end game, which is the true focus of any ARPG, right? They want to make the end game amazing. They've got the first 3 acts done. They're great. The last 3 acts, they said, are like 80% done. So they'll work on them in time, but they want to use this early access period as a time to really fine tune that. And they'll work on that as it is. I think they had brought up, or at least someone had brought up, and I think this was something I read online, was that Last Epoch focused too much on the campaign. So when people got through with the campaign, there wasn't enough end game for them to jump into in the very first initial portions of early access for Last Epoch. And that game had had a early access like 3-4 years. So take that as a grain of salt. So that's the big focus. That's how your character progression is going to work. You then, though, will go into your ascendancy classes. So with Ascension classes, we have the Ascension trials. And these trials are roughly themed across a different culture. They offer different choices, mechanics, everything. And they're a ton of fun from what we've looked at in the original stream here. So you have the trial of the 2 examples that we saw were the trial of Chaos and the trial of Sekemus. Sekemus being Maraketh culture and Chaos being the Vol culture. And it allows you to mix and match these different ways of approaching these trials. And if you've done a lot of other ARPGs, you basically kind of choose other boons and modifiers before going into each step of the trial that then changes how the trial is. Maybe it's monster density, but then they're going to do more damage to you. Maybe they do different elemental damage, all sorts of things. So as you go through these trials, they get harder and harder and different until you complete the trial and do a boss fight at the very end. Completing the trial, though, gives you access to one of 2 Ascension classes. Now that is the start of early access. By actual launch, every single class will have 3 Ascension classes, and completing the trial will give you 2 points to put into your already existing class, or the selection of one and then 2 more points, whatever it is. So the Sorceress, for example, will be a Stormweaver, Elemental Storms on crit, Chronomancer, Manipulate Time. The Warrior will have a Warbringer, which is more focused on ancestral spirits and those totems, their shouts, stuff like that. Or the Titan, which is more on like aftershocks and capabilities of the sort. Ranger will be Deadeye, so using extra projectiles, a lot of bow stuff. Or Pathfinder, which is going to give you flasks and poisons and things of the poison ilk. Witch is going to have an Infernalist, which allows you to summon like Hellhounds. It gives you like a demon form succubus. And there's Blood Mage, which allows you to have skills that cost life. Monk has 2 different really cool ones. Invoker, which is like an elemental avatar, or Acolyte of Cholula, which sounds like Cholula. It's basically a dark monk. You'll use chaos magic. It's really goddamn cool looking. So those are what we know what the Ascendant classes are. We don't know exactly what they all entail just yet because we haven't done the gaming and that kind of action. But what's cool about this is it just offers a different way to play the existing class and add a little bit more flavor in a direction you want to play for that class. Different play styles, preferences, all sorts of things. And what's cool too is it kind of seems like from this initial look, it looks like, for example, the Ranger. Deadeye, okay, I'm going to be better at the bow. Or Pathfinder, okay, I'm be better at flasks and poisons. Whatever that third one is, I imagine it'd be something along the lines of ice or lightning, which they can tap into at their base Ranger level. So I'm assuming each one of these Ascension classes ascends a specific facet of that class's existing tool set. So Infernalist, for example, well, I can summon undead. Well, now I can summon Hellhounds and jump into demon stuff. I can curse things. Well, now I can do blood magic. So I'm interested to see how this looks for our 3rd Ascendancy class and what these Ascendancy classes mean for the long term of the game. It's really cool. And the Blood Mage stuff and the Witch in general has some of the coolest ones. The Dark Monk looks just absolutely awesome. Very, very stoked on this. The end game is naturally going to be the densest part of the game. The part that is most interesting, the part that keeps you involved in the game for the long haul. We've talked about the progression. We've talked about all the levels and everything like that, and the 65 to 7 to 100 during being the beginning of the end game, right? That level 65. So it starts on this thing called the Atlas map. And the objective here is to cleanse corruption from the beast. And you connect these little individual nodes using waystones. So the point of this is to traverse this entire map and do all these little tiny things here to explore, expand, and do every little thing. There's so much crap here. We're going to get into all of it. The Atlas map is interesting in that you use these waystones to go these individual nodes. What's interesting is if you fail the map, if you go to do the map and you die or you do whatever the failure parameter is, if you trigger that, then that map cannot be rerun and you have to basically find a new route there to whatever was blocking. So maybe it's, hey, this waystone unlocks the 4 nodes behind it. Well, I now have to find a different way to get over there, which I think is really cool. It increases the stakes because that's kind of the problem with a lot of modern day ARPGs is there's no real stakes to them. Hey, yeah, you play a hardcore, that's got these stakes, right? You die, you lose forever. But I like that this has a way of replayability built into it by the simple process of if you just lose, you have to get stronger and come back a different route, a different way. There's a lot of different random encounters. There's like these precursor artifacts. There's these strong boxes that can have a bunch of different modifiers on them that give you different items. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And then on the map itself, you can actually craft different factors for the map, increasing the map, the density of the creatures on the map, the rarity of things, the increased drops, damage, experience, everything. And the big question with a system like this always comes down to, what's it going to actually feel like when executed? And like I said in the beginning, it's going to have 50 bosses and 400 monsters at the start of early access, and they plan to double that size during early access and into release. So a total of 100 bosses and 800 monsters by, let's just say, launch. And then every single League, obviously adding in more of both of those. So that's a ton of variety. But what they said was when it comes to the actual biomes and the maps that you're encountering on the Atlas map, they've really dialed up the random generation to have it not feel at all similar from A, the campaign, and B, from other locations within the Atlas map. The various biomes like snowy mountains, jungles, all that kind of stuff, deserts, beaches, whatever, those will have map restrictions. So if you're doing, let's just say, a frozen landscape biome, it will not have the same factors in its random generation as it would for, say, a meadow or a jungle, stuff like that. So you're going to get a lot of variety from being able to do stuff like this. And within each one of those biomes, there's certain things like unique maps like Untainted Paradise, which gives high experience bonuses to beasts, stuff like this. Little things that make these biomes feel unique and different and fun. And on top of it, though, you've got these towers that are going to show more portions of the map. You have this corruption you have to fight. You have boss encounters, all this stuff that boils down to the most important portion of Endgame, which is the progression. So that overall Endgame progression is then bound to 7 systems or 7 skill trees. Here are all 7 of them, and I'm going to go over them on a very high level. So we've got Breach, Ritual, Delirium, Expeditions, Extended Trials, and then the final challenge, which is an Ancient Fortress with Uber bosses. The 7th tree is the overall tree of the Atlas tree. So just to kind of give you, again, a real quick taste of these, because there's a lot of information, and I originally recorded this section, and it was almost like 20 minutes just for that portion. The Breach is basically Tears in Reality, where you fight waves of demons, and then you fight what is called a pinnacle boss. Almost every single one of these these systems have a pinnacle boss. You defeat the boss, it has unique drops, and it also gives you a point on that tree. So when it comes to the Breach, you get catalysts and breach rings. And these catalysts are ways to improve amulets and rings way beyond they normally can. And the breach rings are some of the best rings in the game. So once you get these points, you put them into these trees. For all of these systems, the trees don't give you necessarily player power in the sense that it increases your fire damage by 500%. What it does is it increases your power exclusive to that content. So maybe it has you do more damage within breaches. Maybe rituals now give you more experience. Maybe delirium drops better loot. Whatever it is, that's how that progression system works. So if you decide to respec your character, you don't lose a whole bunch of, you don't have to do a tree for every single one of these things again. You just go ahead and stick with the same things because you're trying to get specific bonuses from those systems. Our second one here is the ritual, which essentially is, again, more waves. You deal with a sacrificial site, you'll do a ritual altar, and then you defeat the King of the Mists. The big thing here, though, is getting omens, which are special items that allow for meta crafting. Basically, you can remove unwanted mods from items, keeping desired ones. So you can really fine-tune things. Delirium is another wave system wherein you deal with harder and harder monsters the deeper and deeper you go, and you can decide to just jump outright and stop and just take your rewards, or go as deep as you can. And the big thing with this is doing simulacrums, which give you those points. That's your pinnacle boss, as it were, because it's a big, huge one. But you get distilled emotions from this, which are a crafting material that are exclusive to the delirium, and you combine them to instill amulets with a notable from the passive tree. We talked about this a little bit, right? Notables and capstones are on the passive tree to drastically change your skills. So you can go ahead and put any notable you want from a progression on the passive tree you've not gone with, a whole different portion of the web, which is really cool. The other system here is the Expedition. This allows you to assist these Kalguran settlers, and you deal with unearthing a bunch of artifacts and doing explosives, and you get a currency that you then trade with 4 different NPCs to get a bunch of different bonuses, a lot of unique items, and then there's Olroth, who is the boss of this. And that, of course, is going to give you points towards that respective tree. Then there's the extended trials, which are the same as your normal trials, but they're harder, they're longer, they're more challenging. For our Trial of Sekhmet, you can get nice jewels here to socket into your items and relics to socket in that give you unique traits, basically making any weapon, any item like a custom unique from that relic. And then you have the Trial of Chaos, which gives you Val Orbs and Soul Cores. Val Orbs will corrupt an item, giving it either more modifications than the 6 that are allowed, or more sockets than they're allowed, or a random penalty, whatever it is. It's basically you're corrupting an item. It is like a chaos modifier. You don't know what it's going to be, and then you cannot do anything to it once you've corrupted it. So you want to do this at the end of everything. And this all culminates with the final challenge of the Ancient Fortress, wherein you will fight an Uber boss that has 3 keys. To get to that Uber boss, you have to find each one of those keys that are bound to a specific faction somewhere on the Atlas. So it's a bit of a, hey, go discover these keys, go bring them over here, and then you fight this uber strong boss, which is the most difficult content in the game, and then further progress. They haven't really revealed a lot of details in the Ancient Fortress because they said deliberately we want you to discover it. So a lot of really juicy endgame mechanics are built into what they're planning just for early access, and there's even more probably down the line with leagues and whatnot in the future launch of Path of Exile 2. So at that, it brings our video here to a close. We've covered pretty much everything. I didn't go into a lot of the details of a lot of the different currencies. I didn't go into a lot of the details of item rarities and items and socketing in all this different stuff into it. Like you can put all these different, there's so many different types of gem. There's so many different types of rune that you can socket in. There's a ton of stuff. Like items can be socketed with Esmite runes, Artificer's orbs. There's just so much crap that can go into this. So I wanted to make it as approachable as possible while also delivering a ton of information and not overwhelming you. Now, I will be doing lots of Path of Exile 2 videos coming up here. With that launch on the 6th, I'll be trying to do some sort of video that will cover each and every one of the classes that you can start off with to give you an idea of which one's going to be right for you. But I'll also be doing mechanic-based guides covering how some mechanics work, how passive trees work, how all the gems work, what all the currencies are, all that crap that I typically cover on my channel with guides. And I'll also, of course, be doing build guides. So if you're on the lookout for more Path of Exile 2 content that will be shared here, take a look at all the mobile links to all this respective information that I've covered so far in the description below. You can find anything that they've posted up that there's relevant information on. The stuff that I'm linking you to is not also, it's not just like, hey, this Mobalytics team just wrote it. It's linked to people that are already existing Path of Exile creators. So those individuals who already know the mechanics and the systems of Path of Exile, they're the ones that have written these articles. So I'm happy to share those with you guys so you guys can get a little bit more information. But as always, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.